All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Todd Hansen. We're at Longplay in Newberg, Oregon. It's February 2nd, 2022. Todd, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
First question, biggest question, is why wine?
Yeah, I ask myself that sometimes. For me, it's a cultural thing in many respects. I think I studied French in high school, and that's what I kind of blame my love of wine on, is I studied French. And then when I studied French, I studied wine once. I went to France, actually, and took a summer course where we studied language, grammar, hardcore conjugations, and tenses in the morning. And then in the afternoon, we had electives, and one of my electives was wine. And I was already a fan of wine before then. And wine is one of those things. It's kind of like the Beatles. The more you get into it, the more you appreciate it. I think that's certainly true. So the more I learned about like France, I mean, what kind of blows an example I give is sort of how if you go to Burgundy, you'll have 3 bottles from the same producer, and one will be like $28, the other one will be $500, and the other one will be $150. They're in the exact same bottle, the exact same glass, same label, just a couple words different,
Mm-hmm.
And that will carry over to the next producer as well. And it's all about place, And I just think that's so cool. I just think that's really neat that the wine can be so unique depending on place. And you can't just make a great wine. It kind of comes to you.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was cool.
So take us through your kind of life before wine. Where were you born and raised?
Okay.
And
I grew up outside of Seattle, actually. And then I went to University of Washington. Then I worked as a CPA at a CPA firm for a couple of years. Then I went to grad school and majored in international business with a minor in French, if you will. So that's why I had gone to France to sort of brush up on my French language skills. I studied there another summer before. And then I took a job with the International Trade Administration at the U.S. Department of Commerce in Washington, D.C., where I spent 5 years. And there was a little wine shop down the street from me. I lived in Georgetown in a little condo. And I kind of enjoyed stopping by that wine shop from time to time and exploring wine. And then and I took a course at Georgetown University at night, a French language course. And it just happened to be a focus on wine as well. It was a culture class. Mm-hmm. So we would learn it. It was called Tour de France, and we would do a tour of France with each department. And we would learn about the wine from that region, the famous poets, artists, writers from that region, the historical notes from that region. And it was just a really neat class, a really fun teacher too. And it was a good group of people, a very diverse group too, mm-hmm. in some ways. And so, but with a love of France, really. And then we learned a lot about wine there. And then when I traveled with the government, I traveled a lot with the International Trade Administration, as you might imagine. And we went to Chile. And what do you do when you're in Chile? Maybe you go to the Casablanca Valley for a couple of days if you're there for a few weeks. And South Africa, what do you do in South Africa? Austria, and so I really enjoyed that wine tourism. And then I was posted in West Africa for a couple of years at the embassy, and posted at the U.S. mission to the European Union for a couple of years in Brussels. Also did a short domestic tour in San Francisco at the regional office there, which was quite convenient. Living in the Marina District, just hop on the bridge every Sunday and go hit a couple wineries. So yeah, wine was very much part of my life, let's say, as an amateur. And then when we were living in Brussels, my wife and we were going to have a baby, and we decided it would be a lot easier in the United States, where we speak the same language as the doctors. We had no idea where I would go after Brussels, but it probably wouldn't be Brussels again. It'd probably be someplace very much less developed, and having been in Abidjan and seen the challenges some people with very young children face there as far as health concerns and everything, and just the stress it put on my wife being there. When we were there was some, little military uprising, popular uprising, bullets through the window type of stuff. So I kind of didn't want to go through that with a baby again. Mm-hmm. So again, with a baby, I should say. So So it was time to change jobs. And I looked for jobs for a little while, and I couldn't really find anything that appealed to me after the excitement of, traveling the world that sort of held the same allure. I didn't want to be in a cubicle. And so I said, well, maybe I'll buy a wine shop or I'll buy a vineyard, buy a job, since I couldn't find a job that appealed to me. And the wine shops, I was frustrated by the fact that they were turning into bars more than wine shops. Mm-hmm. And I'm still frustrated by that fact. And so I bought a vineyard. We started looking. We looked in Northern California a little bit. We looked in Walla Walla a little bit. But when we came here, we said, wow, this is just where we want to be, really. Not Northern California, North Central Coast, sort of,
Mm-hmm.
But, the challenge there is anything I could afford was off-grid, and probably 4 hours, 3 hours on, parts of that dirt road to San Francisco just to get to civilization. And so we liked Portland. Portland, to me, I say it felt like Seattle felt when I left Seattle in 1990 or whatever. So, or Seattle, when I went back to Seattle, I was like, what is this place? It's just crazy how it had changed so much. So we settled on here, and I was trolling. We worked with an agent, but I was actually just, surfing the web, and I found a property for sale, and it had been part of Rex Hill's Jacob Hart vineyard there on the hillside. They, Paul Hart and Jan Jacobs were selling their business, really, mm-hmm. and shedding a few vineyards to maybe this is speculation on my part, but I believe they were shedding some vineyards to maybe market more of an approachable price on the whole business. So a few of their vineyards went up for sale, and I fortunately only bought one because I was tempted to buy two, but because they were next to each other. They had divided one parcel, 50 acres and 50 acres, and I was like, wow, big vineyard. But the other one got bought before I could make the offer anyhow, and it turns out that was a wise move, because there's, it's a lot of, I've joked that if I triple my money, I might break even, type of thing, because the vineyard costs a little bit of money to run, and especially if you are me, where I kind of spoil it. I'm not one of those people who changes the oil in my car every 3,000 miles like some people do. But my vineyard is sort of that, mm-hmm. for me, where I do have some things that just annoy me, where I've neglected the fence line. I need to replace some section of fence, but I love the vines, and I'll do anything for them. So I saw this piece of property for sale, called the realtor. We came down. We walked around. He said, this would make complex wines. And I didn't know exactly what he meant at the time. And then doing my due diligence, I called Aaron Hess. And he had been the previous winemaker for Rex Hill, but he was no longer affiliated with the brand. And so he was able to speak freely. And he said, I would buy it if I had, a couple $100,000. And so, and I liked Aaron. I just really liked Aaron. So I bought it, and we moved down here a few months later. We don't live on the property. We live near Tigard, and just started farming, and worked with Results Partners as our vineyard manager at first. And then, let's back up a little bit. So as I was buying it, I was trying to sell the grapes, or test the market for the grapes. The crop, I bought it in 2005. We didn't close. I think I contracted in June, but we didn't close till October 1st. And during that interim, I was trying to, figure out what I was going to do with all these grapes. I didn't want to make wine. I just wanted to drive a tractor, be outdoors, and write poetry in the vineyard, I guess. And so I went and visited David Adelsheim. And he was just so gracious, and he took me aside, and we opened a bottle of Bryan Creek Vineyard, which is not too far from my property. And he, we got along reasonably well, and I asked him about buying grapes a little while later, and he said, well, I tell you what, Todd, you go out and sell as much grapes as you can, and I'll buy whatever you can't sell. And that was in retrospect, that was like one of the most amazing things a person could do, just have a backstop there. And so I went to Lynn Pinner-Ash, because she had been the winemaker at Rex Hill before Aaron, and Lynn said, sure, I'd love to get some grapes from that. Oh my gosh. And then she said, do you still have the Sangiovese? It's like, I never knew Sangiovese was there. But there were some plantings that were like awkwardly done in 2001, and I think that's what she was talking about. I think they had replaced some vines. And apparently there had also been some Viognier there way back in the day, just because 1980 or 1990, I guess, is when it was first planted. They didn't really know what would work on that site. Mm-hmm. And now maybe Sangiovese might work, And so she took some fruit, and then I called Josh Bergstrom, and he's like, do you still have that Chardonnay? And I said, yeah. And he's like, oh, I'll take the Chardonnay. And so Josh took the Chardonnay and some of the Pinot Noir as well. And then I called David Alsheim and said, you've got the rest. And he said, okay, great. And that's how we started out. And that was just really fun. And so after harvest in 2006, I went to Pinner-Ash. She invited me over, and we did some barrel tasting. And I was just like, man, this is a beautiful building, isn't it? And this is just such a posh lifestyle she has compared to me, coming home with dirt like in every nook and cranny and stuff after I mow or whatever at the vineyard. And so I said, I want to do this. So I called Aaron, and I said, hey, Aaron, I kind of want to make some wine. And Aaron said, I've been waiting for you. He knew it was inevitable. And so that's when that partnership started, 2007, where Aaron was my winemaker at 12th and Maple, where he was the head winemaker. And that was a lot of fun. Aaron, I don't know how much you know about Aaron. He passed away in 2011, I believe it was, if memory serves me correct. And he was a very intense person, just intimidating, brilliant, so brilliant. And just, he didn't suffer fools. He didn't even entertain the notion of training people, really, unless it was by fire. And so he taught me quite a few things, though. But he loved to just explain things or ideas, that he had about how, doing this at this time and cold soaking for this long, and all. He also was a fan, and I've been trying to get other people to talk to me about this, where if you needed to do a little acid nudge, maybe to do a little citric at the same time. And because he thought it was more elegant and lighter on the palate, and everybody else is so terrified of that. But that was Aaron. He lived on the edge. Mm-hmm. And so I worked with Aaron until he left 12th and Maple. And then I needed a new home. And fortunately, I had sold some fruit in 2009 to Heath Payne. Yeah, Heath Payne. And unfortunately, he abandoned his label, while the fruit was still in barrel, and wound up selling it to Jay Christopher. Or unfortunately for him, fortunate for me. And so when I needed a new home, I contacted Jay Summers, and he said, yeah, I've got plenty of room. I've got this fancy brand new winery. Hopefully it'll be done. So I went there and made Jay, said, get this fermenter. Because I had at 12th and Maple, they would lend me fermenters. Jay, he's like, the fermenter needs to be this fermenter. It's 2.5 ton stainless steel, and these fittings and stuff. So I called up JV Northwest and said, I need the J. Christopher fermenters. And they knew exactly what I was talking about. And so I bought a couple of those, and I was off to the races with Jay. And what I learned from Jay, Aaron had kind of expressed this, but Jay really sort of drove the point home, is to trust the wine, that it tends to fix itself. Don't be too anxious if things aren't going exactly according to how they should in the textbook, because a lot of times it will write itself. And my philosophy has always been that we've been making wine as humans for thousands of years, and we didn't always have pH meters and all this stuff. So you can get a little too down in the weeds, and maybe you lose the soul. Sort of like music. I say live recording is more authentic than something that's over-polished, overdubbed, auto-tuned and remixed. So that's become my winemaking philosophy, and that's why when it was time to start a wine label, I called it Longplay. Because I said I didn't want a wine that was like a ringtone. I wanted it to be more something that you spend an evening with and maybe enjoy with friends, like your favorite record. And names are hard to come up with, let me tell you. It's hard to brand something. And I'm still amazed, not so much at the wine industry sometimes, but like technology and stuff. When I see some of these great brands out there, it's just like, oh man, that's so clever. How did they come up with that? And I see some that just like, no, that doesn't work. But
The opposite of that.
It's hard, yeah. I think it's underappreciated how difficult it is to brand something, and I think it's overestimated how important it is to some degree, because I think what's in the bottle is what counts, really. Because, look around us. We've got the joke used to be, the harder it was to pronounce and, just be first in the alphabet type of thing, I didn't get that memo with the L, but it's okay. And so, that's why it's called Longplay. Because I say wine's kind of like music, a question of taste. Your favorite song, my favorite song couldn't be different, but that doesn't make one better than the other necessarily. It's just, a question of taste. And so then I was with Jay Summers until 2017. In 2017, Jay ran out of room at his fancy, beautiful winery. And it is, it's an amazing facility. And so I went over to Todd Hansen, who was, and this is a crazy story, Gypsy Dancer Estate, which had been started by Gary Andrews, was being revived by Christine Andrews, and she bought fruit from me. And I don't know how we met each other, but she bought some of my favorite fruit, and so I was almost jealous of it. And she was making the wine with Todd Hansen at his facility in McMinnville, and so because turnover in my client base has been it hasn't been significant. Most everybody comes back every year, but every once in a while you lose somebody. So I'm working, for example, I lost Jay Christopher after the smoky year. They lost their fruit, unfortunately. I felt terrible, but they had lost Jay as well, so I didn't feel as terrible as I would have. So I kept some of that fruit for myself, and it was some of the best fruit. And I built this building, and I need to expand capacity to sort of justify the rent on this place. So I was working with Christine in 2016, and then in 2017 I had more fruit than space at J. Christopher, and Todd Hansen said, come on over, I got plenty of room, because I mentioned it to him, and we'll make some wine here, because I couldn't find anybody to buy the grapes because it was a fruitful year, 2017. So we made some wine together, and Todd Hansen was a big fan of whole cluster, and I was always a big fan of whole cluster, and Jay wasn't a big fan of whole cluster, and Aaron seemed to be a big fan of whole cluster. And so we did a fermenter of whole cluster, and I just really loved it. And I took those barrels and put them in a bottle, and we called it Experience. And it's just a really nice wine. And so we did that. So after that, I needed a new home, and I'd been selling fruit to John Groshaw. The first year I sold him fruit was 2010, just like 2 tons. And but he's the nicest guy, I think, in the industry. And so I mentioned to him, and he had just rented a beautiful new winery down in Amity, and he said, I got plenty of room, come on down. And so I went down to there. Even though it's a bit of a haul, it was a very nice space and just a very collaborative atmosphere. You had a lot of people making wine there. A little bit of mayhem, but that's more my fault probably than anybody else's, just because I'm probably one of the least organized people in the industry. And so we made wine there, and we just piled a fermenter high with whole cluster, and it just kind of settled down as it macerated, and it made a beautiful wine. And we did the same thing in 19. And so that's where the whole cluster thing came from. And I'm moving. I don't know if I'll go 100% whole cluster, but we might do a few more fermenters next year, whole cluster. This year we did 2. And so so I was at Groshaw, and it was just that 2017 is when I decided I needed my own space because I was being ping-ponged around a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so I started looking. And my vineyard is on an easement that would make it complicated, I think, to build a winery. Also, my neighbors, eventually when I abandon ship or whatever, or decide to change careers again, I don't know when that will be, but it's inevitable. I mean, no one lives forever. I expect one of my neighbors might buy my vineyard, and they all have fancy giant wineries, so I don't think they'd want mine. They'd say, wow, that's an expensive tractor shed, you know? So I didn't want to build the winery at the vineyard. And I didn't even know I wanted to build a winery, to be honest. I was at this inflection point when I was tempted to sell. Because there were people offering to buy my vineyard. And I decided that I didn't want to quit. I didn't want to be a quitter. And in retrospect, I don't know if it was the wise decision, but I realized that I'd been, in 2011, well, let's go back a little bit on the wine.
Does that work okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
So 2007, I made wine. I made 500 cases of wine. Talk about a great time to start making wine, the 2007 vintage, when nobody wanted to touch the vintage. And the 2006 vintage was so hedonistic and very pleasurable, was on the market, and I'm out there trying to sell 2007s. And then you look around, and 2008 comes next. And that's like the vintage of the century. And so I'm sitting on these 2007s, and I can't sell them. And I just left them in the warehouse and pretended they didn't exist. And then 2008, I made Aaron made some really just beautiful wines. And that sort of helped me get lifted off the ground a little bit. I didn't have to sell the wine, I just had to deliver it, really, you know? And then 9 was kind of the same story. I didn't run into much trouble with 9. And 10, people were a little more suspicious of 10. It's still one of my favorite vintages of all time. And then 2011 was, the coldest year, I think, in record, really. Maybe 1999 might have challenged it. But we finished picking November 2nd, 2011. And I still love those wines, but people were suspicious of them to some degree. And I opened a little shop in downtown Newberg, just trying to maybe move a little bit of the product. And also what I discovered was it was just so rewarding to build that relationship with customers and see people who actually liked your product and everything. And it was fun. And I really only did it on weekends, which was kind of a nice break from the alone time at the farm, where I could interact with other humans and get that social interaction that I kind of was lacking at the vineyard in my life. But 2 days a week was plenty for me, really, especially at that level. Although some days it would be just me all by myself, playing Candy Crush or something, waiting and listening to music and hoping somebody shows up. So after doing that for 10 years, I knew that was not going to work. That little shop just didn't have the traction given the tasting room arms race we've seen over the past decade. And so I decided that was another compelling reason why I said, let's just go big and build a winery. So I built a winery. And that kind of, I remember like in 1989 going down to Napa Valley and tasting at Gurgich in a fruit fly filled 100 square foot basically tasting room on a wooden counter. And I kind of missed that element to some degree. I don't know if it's viable these days, and I'm somewhat disappointed in that. If I were to say my biggest complaint about the wine industry is probably distribution. That it's just so complicated and so dominated by a handful. And then the small, there's a batch of small distributors out there, but they struggle just because they don't have the market power. And the big 3 or 4 just eat them for lunch. So I do have one distributor now. I've had several distributors over the years. I've had several distributors go broke owing me money. So I'm suspicious of distribution at my level, let's say, or it's hard. I have a very good distributor down in California who was introduced to me by John Groshaw, and he had called Groshaw saying, I want to distribute your wines, and Groshaw said, hey, I already have a distributor in California, and I'm too big for you. And so, and that he was correct, but Jeff is just super. He's just super to work with. Not, we don't always work perfectly, let's say, but we get along. We trust. There's a level of trust there, and partnership. I mean, that for me. I think you have to view the business as partnerships. I view my fruit customers as partners. If you ask them, the way I invoice them is somewhat heterodox. I just sort of, how did you like the fruit? This is how much it cost me to farm the vineyard. Cash basis. This is how much it would be per ton. You've got better tons than some other people, or you've got, tons that are maybe less. So I'll bump it up or down a couple $100 and say, what do you think of this? And usually they're okay with it, but that's how I don't like we have written contracts, but I say if you need a written contract, you're in the wrong business, really. I'd rather work with people I trust. And I think that's something I hope we don't lose as we go by, with time. But yeah, written contract is one page, basically says you get these grapes so they know which rows. Let me know if you want more or less leaf pull. And I go back and forth with the customer throughout the year. How much leaf pulling do you want? How much, this is what the other customers are doing. It's like Patricia Green has been a client since 2010 or 11. And Patty would walk the vineyard with me, and she had, her opinions, and I always was well informed by them. I say any success I have in the vineyard is from my clients, and especially people like Patty Green, who would, really give you insight on why she was doing what she was doing when it came to leaf pulling or fruit dropping or, things like that. So yeah, that's how I work with them. It's collaborative. You're on the same team. I mean, my goal and their goal is both, to make great wine.
So I want to back up a second to before you're in Oregon. I'm curious, as you're educating yourself in wine, as you're tasting and you're traveling, have you gathered impressions of the Oregon wine industry at this point? Have you had wines?
Yeah.
What is your, before you get here, what's your initial impression of the industry?
Well, I knew nothing about the industry really. What my Oregon epiphany, if you will, was when we lived in San Francisco. We had some friends from out of town. My wife is, she's very reliant, perhaps overly reliant sometimes, on reviews in newspapers and stuff. She just really likes to read review columns and things like that. And she had read an article in this, I think it was a Chronicle, San Francisco Chronicle, about Oregon being the new wine scene, and it had mentioned Domaine Drouhin. Or it may have been about them buying the vineyard or something. This was 2001, and so it was probably a 99 or 98 we drank. But we went to a restaurant with some friends and we saw that on the menu, and she's like, oh, Oregon, and I'm like, oh yeah, let's try that. Everybody turned to me to order the wine because I had that reputation that I was the one who would order wine when we went to restaurants with friends. And so we bought a bottle of Domaine Drouhin, and it was so delicious. And we bought another bottle, and it was super delicious. It was a group of 6. It was okay. And so yeah, that was my Oregon moment. Was that? And then we had another friend in San Francisco who really loved Pinot Noir. I don't know that she loved Oregon that much, but she sort of was just a huge Pinot fan. And so. But that was the Oregon bottle that sort of tipped me. And then when we left, after I left Brussels, we lived in Seattle for a year, really, while kind of gathered things up. And we would buy, the Oregon wine was plentiful up there. You could just buy more than I think you can almost here, in some stores. So yeah, I explored Oregon wine up there. And we came down here a couple times.
So as you got here, I want to talk about the vineyard, but before we talk about the vineyard, I'm curious about once you bought it, you bought into an industry. You hadn't worked here before,
Nope.
You hadn't done anything like that. So tell me about the reaction or the welcome you got, or what was it like buying into the industry?
So easy. It was so easy. Everybody acted like they already knew me in some ways, and I think it was partly the pedigree of the property. I'm grateful I had looked at undeveloped properties that I would have planted myself and everything, and I'm glad I didn't have to hoe that row, because that would have been really hard. I think having no reputation and the land having really no reputation. So that was a good move, lucky break, and so we just, and I don't know, I'm just naive, I guess. Everything was fine, and Results Partners, to their credit, they were very good about making it easy for me as an owner. I mean, they manage for a lot of absentee owners too, and so, but they allowed me to do what I wanted to do, and as I came to manage or keep some blocks for myself, they would let me sort of get in the way there with my farming. And then, I'll touch on this. So back to Archery Summit connection. Javier Marin was the vineyard manager at Shea Vineyard for about, I don't know, maybe 20 years or so, right? And John Olenek used to own the property just below me, which was called Olenek Vineyard, now owned by Cooper Mountain. But in 2010, his cousin, Chris Maespink, left Shea, where he was the winemaker before. And Chris and Javier were very good friends. And so Javier decided he was going to leave Shea as well. And he said partly just because it was the same vineyard year after year, and he wanted to kind of be his own boss. And so he started his own vineyard management company. In 2010, he managed just 2 vineyards, my vineyard and Olenek Vineyard, with a very small crew that he respectfully poached from. He was careful about who he poached. His brother's now the vineyard manager at Shea, so he didn't take his brother. And Javier talk about a partner. We are on the same, we're on the same page all the time. It's like we're always on this, work so well together. That's the other piece of great luck I have. And that's another reason why I can't retire ever, is because as long as Javier is in business, I'll stay in business. Can't sell my vineyard. And so, Javier allows me to do even more than, and the communication is just, because Javier works in the field, there's no management layer. There's just the crew manager who's Javier. And so, and he's so flexible. And so he does the spraying, I do the mowing. I tend to do a lot of the handwork in my section when it comes to dropping fruit, things like that, perfecting the fruit, the second round. But he does, he and his crew do most of the hard work. I dig the poison oak. Javier is allergic to poison oaks. I get that there. I'm allergic to poison oak too, but somebody's got to do it. So my daughter isn't. But we go and I dig the poison oak, and I try to fix broken things. And I break a lot of things, so there's that too.
So tell me about the vineyard then. Obviously, you came in without the background in vineyard or that. So tell me about the vineyard that you inherited or that you purchased. What the condition was and what you have done to it in the years since. Yeah.
So when I walked the vineyard with Mike McLean, the realtor, and he said, "This will make complex wines," I didn't know that was sort of a backhanded compliment in some ways, because the vineyard has a little bit of undulation, let's say. It's not a steady slope. It kind of is like a staircase, sort of, with a few dips and swales. And the vineyard has about 5 acres of some of the best soil in the Willamette Valley. And probably about 5 acres of some of the most challenging soils in the Willamette Valley. And then the rest is just sort of your standard soil, nice, but not not amazing. Like the area of the vineyard that I call the Jory Bench, actually kind of named by Sterling Fox, who used to work as the vineyard manager at Rex Hill, is it's just like I say it's like devil's food cake batter. Just the color and the consistency when it's wet or dry. You can dig as far as you want and never hit a rock. Really, it's just amazing. And there's other areas that are just like pure cobble. It's like you took a street from Brussels and the Grand Place and just sort of planted it with grapes. And so the downside to that in some respects is Leah's vineyard does not have a super consistent profile. I say there's a common thread to the wines that come from the vineyard, but you wouldn't say, you could taste 3 barrels and you'd never know it's the same vineyard really, unless you were looking for that one sort of common note that shows up, because some blocks come in very dark and kind of brawny, and some come in even if it's the same clone. And the clonal variation actually is remarkable as well, I believe. Like 828, I have some 828. It's just so different, and I love it. I have some 777, which I planted based on a recommendation from David Adelsheim. And it's a very solid component, let's say. And then when I bought the vineyard, it was planted in 1990 initially with some Wädenswil, or what they call DH Swiss, Dundee Hill Swiss, that I think came from a vineyard in, Dundee Hills Vineyard, I think it was actually called even. And then there was what was called Pommard, and some Wente Chardonnay, 2 acres of that, 2.25 acres of that. And then way too much, like about maybe 11 acres of 115 clone, just this giant swath of 115, which is fine if you're a big winery, but if you're me, I always have 115 for sale because it's just so much of it. And then a little bit of that Mariafeld, which is not too common here, and I kind of love it. It's very fun. It's tasty to eat as a table grape too, which is a bonus, and it's easy to farm to some degree. It definitely puts out a lot of fruit if you aren't careful. I probably dropped. It's scary how much fruit it will produce. Really, at least visually, it's actually not that much in tonnage. It's just the clusters are so loose; it looks like there's even more. Patricia Green gets the other little bitty block of that, and they get more fruit off of theirs than I do, because Javier likes to keep me out of the vineyard around, because I'm always dropping any cluster that isn't perfect, and so I also don't like crowdiness. I like each cluster to look like a perfect picture. So yeah, I don't get as much fruit off of it as I should probably, and I think it would probably make better wine if I took more fruit off of it. So yeah. So that's the vineyard. It was planted in 1991. I've initially 1990, 1991, 1992 were the initial plantings. Then in 1999 they put in that big section of 115. In 2001 they did the 2 awkward strips of Mariafeld. And then in 2009 I added 3 3/4 acres of some 828, 114, and 777, and I did RG on the 777 on the recommendation of David Adelsheim, and then I talked to Boyd Teagarden up at Natalie's estate, and I was kicking the dirt in his vineyard, and it looked a lot like the dirt where I was going to plant. Just the weeds were the same and everything like that, or the natural cover. We don't call them weeds, and so they were the same. And I said, what kind of rootstock do you have? And he said, I've got SO4. It's great, It's a plunging rootstock, and it doesn't get moisture stress or anything. And so I used SO4 on that, and I actually really like that decision so far. And then I added with Javier's suggestion, Javier wants me to plant more always because he kind of gets paid by the acre. So I added another acre of Wädenswil, and for that we took cuttings from some of the old vines, took them down to Broadacres Nursery down by Aurora, and had them graft it to rootstock, and then planted it, and that's just beautiful. It's beautiful. And then we added some Pommard, another acre Pommard, and then a couple years ago I dug up some of the old Pomard that was phylloxerated. I still have some own rooted stuff, and I say it's a war of attrition. We just have to, stay ahead of it, and we're spoiling them. It's not economical, but it's you don't have vines planted. You can't buy vines planted in 1990 today, or plant vines planted in 1990. So we keep those vines, and that's what I keep for myself a lot of. Patricia Green gets a little bit of the old stuff too, and then I dug up some of the Pomard and we put in some Chardonnay, because I love my Chardonnay, and I only had the 2 acres and they were in decline, because that's own rooted, and Wente to begin with is going to do small crop. The Wente shot berry is just super tiny, and so I'm excited for that. I did it as every row is a different clone, kind of. So I've got like 6 rows of 96 and 76, but they're like every 4th row or something. And I've got 5 rows of 75, and it's every 5th row. And then 108, I think I've got 2 rows, and then I've got the Muscat Chardonnay. I did just 2 or 3 rows of that, and so I did 2 acres, and I need to tag those rows so I know which is which. I have it written down somewhere. I'm so afraid I'm going to lose it, and so I want to do Chardonnay. I want to play with it. I want to experiment with that. And Chardonnay, I kind of love Chardonnay because it's so receptive to winemaking, whereas Pinot Noir, it doesn't like winemaking. It's like you just kind of get the fruit and just let it do its thing and stay away, and you have to pick at the right time, and there's definitely a discrete right time, where I think with Chardonnay the right time is more a question of style and taste and winemaking, because there's so mallow or no mallow, oak, no oak, and I really am looking forward to having a little more material to work with, so hopefully I can sell it as wine, because I want to keep it, because I want to play with it. So yeah, I just got a new like kettle type fermenter, and I want to stainless steel, and I want to try that with I want to make a brighter, because my Chardonnay, I love my Chardonnay. It's but it's a very serious wine. I wouldn't call it fun, And I've always loved Gruner Veltliner, and I have this like hankering to plant some Gruner Veltliner just so I can have something that's quaffable and fun. And so I'm gonna maybe try to see if I can make a stainless steel Chardonnay that's juicy, fun. Yeah. So, if not, I'll plant Gruner. I still want to plant Gruner. I don't know if I've got the perfect site for Gruner, but we'll see.
When it's come to learning these kinds of things, both on the farming side, the winemaking side, the style side, tell me about the process for you. How have you educated yourself, and where do you feel you are in the process of sort of finding your style and your sort of method?
Yeah. So when I was with Results Partners, well, let's talk about the vineyard first. With Results Partners, I wanted to learn everything, and I'd read books, and seen, I guess, movies and whatnot, but I wanted to learn everything, and so there was one just super nice guy who worked for RP, Esquivio, and he sort of became my mentor, and he would teach me how to prune and how to brush pull. Not that there's a lot to learn there, just the main thing is wear a build cap so you don't smack your nose so much, and then how to tie the vines. That's the most zen part. I just love, that's my favorite time of year, is when we tie the vines in the vineyard, and the tip and tie, and you're sort of asking that vine, how much do you want to give me this year? How long should I leave this arm, this cane? And then you've got the one next to it, and you're like, maybe this one wants to give a little more than this one, and how close do they want to be together? And it's just a very zen thing, because the vines like kind of speak to you, I think, at that time of year. You have to really listen to the vine. And then, so he taught me that, and how, he taught me farming, really, of the vineyard. And he didn't really explain why so much, but you could just learn, And he was so patient with me, and just such a nice guy. And then another person who worked for Results Partner was Miguel, and he was the same. I mean, he was super to work with as well. And so when I took Javier, as my vineyard manager when I hired him, and like a year later I mentioned, I learned from these guys at Results Partners, Mikael and Esuvio, and he's like, oh, Mikael's my brother. I think he's his brother. And Esuvio, he's my cousin. And so that explained it, that's why. But that's where I learned the vine growing really was from them, and Javier too. He's a great teacher. And then on the winemaking side, Aaron, he would just preach. He didn't really teach the fundamentals, let's say. It was a 400 level course right at the start. And then, and actually my other clients too. Whenever I would deliver fruit, I always wanted to see it go in the fermenter. I wanted to know how they were doing it. I'd read, this was, North American Pinot Noir by Hager, John Winthrop Hager. I had read that before I bought the vineyard, I think, and I know it was in Seattle. I remember reading it in Seattle, and I was just fascinated by that back of the book where he interviews different wineries and how they make the wine, and some are in beeswax coated redwood fermenters, and others pressed when dry, pressed before dryness, whole cluster, no whole cluster, pick at this point, pick at that point. I was so confused because it seemed like there was no right answer. But in reality, I think it depends on your goals or whatever, and what you're working with, the material you're working with. And what's funny is I don't imagine that A to B changes that much. You know what I mean? Because the fruit will speak, I think, in some ways. You can ruin it, but I think a lot of times it's just the fruit will speak when it comes to Pinot Noir. So yeah, I just, and so I'd go, and I was, the only farmer who would help sort the fruit, because I liked to see that they took good care of it too. If I didn't feel they were doing a great job, they might not get the fruit next year.
So as you started making your own wine, and you started to kind of pick your own blocks and figure out so tell me about you have all these different mentors, obviously all these different opinions, and as you mentioned, there's no necessarily right answer when it comes to Pinot. So tell me about finding your sweet spot. Do you rely purely on what the grapes are telling you, or do you have kind of an end goal in mind with what the wine should taste like? Yeah,
I have an end goal. But it's shifting constantly, kind of. Like I say, I love whole cluster. I like my wines to be, I don't want them to be too terribly austere, but I'm leaning more and more maybe that way. You won't see it in 2021, but 2022, man. I think last year we picked one block right next to each other, same clone, one block like a week ahead of another one. I like the one we picked a week earlier so much better, even though it wouldn't have met my previous tests. Because Aaron, he would walk the vineyard, and he was always like, November 2nd we picked in 2011. That wasn't Aaron. 2010 we picked, or when did we pick 2010? Man, October 30th? 2008 we picked late October 30th, I believe, as well. And everybody else would be picked. And the birds were coming, and I'd have netting up, and they'd still get in the nets. And so, but that was Aaron's style, is he liked to pick really late, and because he wanted the seeds to be brown. And if the seeds are brown and crispy, if you chew the seeds and they aren't bitter, that's when you make the good wine. It's his sort of thing. And so that was sort of my benchmark on when to pick. And winemaking style is sort of from Aaron as well, sort of let it sit, long cold soak, not too much, just let it do its thing. I think I'll start moving with my neighbors and colleagues to earlier picking, because it seems to be the trend these days, and it seems to make nice wines. I'll say though, I taste wines from maybe some other regions, and it seems they pick too early to me. I get tastes of pear and lychee, and I really don't like that in a red Pinot Noir. To me, that's fine in a rosé. In red Pinot Noir, I like it to have that. I like it at least to strawberry in cherry. Strawberry and cherry is the sweet spot. Even a little plum, depending on the clone. But when I don't want to get to fig, but I don't like the watermelon and lychee and white fruit in my red Pinot Noir. And I think some places they just kind of almost have to pick at that stage of flavor, right? Because there's like 5 curves of ripeness, I say, or whatever, the unholy 5 curves. And so you've got like desiccation level, which is you've got green tannin, which goes zoop. I'm doing this from my perspective. You've got ripe tannin, which is the velvety, yummy tannins, and that that increases as it gets ripe, and it's not linear either. And then you've got acidity, which can fall off a cliff if you aren't careful. And natural acidity is so much better than adjusted acidity that you definitely, we try not to adjust unless we absolutely wind up with we'll wind up with a bland product. Because nobody wants a wine that doesn't taste good. I would love to stick to my ideals there, but sometimes the fruit doesn't cooperate. And so, and you're fighting those 5 curves really. And did I miss it? I don't know. There's sugar levels too, right? Brix, yeah. You don't want that to go sky high. And so you're trying to get those to sync up so they all are at the sweet spot at the same time, and that's the hard part, and that's, if I had a crystal ball, and I could know what the weather was going to be, and I could maybe do a little better. But I mean, that also informs your fruit dropping and your leaf pulling and some other decisions you might make,
You mentioned the shift toward whole cluster and that being kind of a recent thing. Tell me, was there a wine you had or something you worked with that really turned you on to that? And what is it about whole cluster that you find exciting?
I like the texture. I was listening to Levi Dalton. I'll Drink to That podcast. I've listened to, I think, almost every episode of that. And someone on there, and it wasn't about whole cluster but so much, but he was saying that wine is at least 50% flavor or 50% texture. It's not so much about flavor as it is texture, and they really like the whole cluster part. And a lot of people on that program were big fans of whole cluster. And I had Jamie Kutch's wines from the Sonoma Coast, I believe, is where he gets fruit, and so I just really love the texture of those wines and the aromatics too. Gosh, whole cluster aromatics. And then Todd Hansen did that, and Jay did one fermenter, not for me but for him, with my fruit whole cluster. I don't even know if I ever even got to taste it, but it just appealed to me. It's kind of like and White Rose Estate was probably the leader there. They had bought my fruit since 2009 or 2010 because we were picking in the dark. It was raining, and we lined up cars to light the vineyard so we could pick, because it was just, we had to get the fruit in, and it was so. But Jesus was a big fan of whole cluster, and at White Rose they had these tall, thin fermenters, and they'd let it the convection, from the whole cluster will work its magic. And I loved their wines. I just loved their wines, and I loved watching them make the wines. Loading it and everything. It was just fun. It looked like so much less work too. And Greg Sanders, I listened to an interview with him, and I knew Greg, but I'd never discussed winemaking philosophy at that level with him. And he had said, when the monks were making wine, they didn't have destimmers, and so they would just throw the whole thing in. So they probably selected for the better tasting stems, and it just made so much sense. And it's part of the fruit.
So tell me about this space as we're coming into obviously this awesome new space here. Tell me about you mentioned kind of looking for the right spot. What was it about here, and what were you looking for, and what are kind of the highlights of what you came up with?
Yeah, so I started looking for a place to build a winery, and I wanted to be in Newberg. I like Newberg. I just like the town. The first Fridays had been, before I opened my tasting room, I did first Fridays on the art walk there in Newberg. I would set up a card table with a tablecloth and pour 3 samples of wine into a stubby little glass, and I would be at Brown Tarlow, and I was a lot of times at Cusick Picture Frame with Phil Cusick, who's just an institution. And then that was my introduction to selling wine across the table to people, and that's why I opened my little shop. And then I wanted a place in town because I made that connection with the local people, even though I would guess less than 20% of my market is Newberg, but still. And then it's convenient to my home in Tigard. And so I looked around, and I was just looking on LandLoopNet or whatever it is, one of the websites, and this popped up, and I called, and it was available, and I said, yeah, I'll take it. So I did a little due diligence, maybe not as much as I should have, but I had been talking to architects for years about building my winery, and I really connected with Richard Brown, and he had built some fancy wineries, and some more approachable wineries, but he designed Alexana, Brooks Winery, and so I just really liked the guy. And so I bought this funny pizza slice. It's a triangular piece of land, and I drew sort of a winery on it myself with like a pole barn here and like a little hut at this end for the tasting room. And I sort of showed that to him, and he modified a little bit, and then somehow this popped out of his drawings one day, and I was like, I don't know about that. And then I loved it, and then we talked, should it slope this way, should it slope that way? And we said, well, it should slope, this direction, because the grapes will come in there and you need more elevation at that end of the building, and also that way the solar panels will tilt up and it'll look cooler if the solar panels are tilted up rather than if they're flush. And so that was fun. And I say it kind of looks like a Cybertruck, and I'm a big Tesla fan. I'm like an Elon fanboy. Any podcast he's on, his Twitter feed, I just really think he has such a unique perspective. And so I ordered a Cybertruck the day they were launched and whatnot. We'll see if I ever get it. I like the building, and so we worked a lot on it. It was very much a collaborative process, I would say, with Hope Telford and Jason over at Richard Brown, or now it's called Telford Brown Associates, I believe, or Telford Brown Architecture Design, Telford Brown Design Studio. Yeah, they came up with a name that just doesn't fit on any box you try to type it into. And so, we worked together a lot. I could look at my records for how many times I parked down on 13th Avenue where their, building is, but we went back and forth a lot. What blows my mind really to this day is the way they were able to visualize how it would fit on this piece of land just from inside their head, Basically, they drew this and plopped it down, and the builder, Josh at Cornice Construction, was able to make that translation from drawing to actual building. And it just still boggles my mind that it actually fit, that the land, is the right slopes and things like that. It's crazy. Yeah. But it's a place that I think kind of has my vibes and values. It's super, as green as we could make. I didn't do LEED because I'm not a tick a box kind of guy. It's like I farm the vineyard organically. I'm not yet certified. I may do it because there's, but there's enough red tape in this world. And so, we do our best to make it as green as possible. Very conscious of every thing we do. I say every day's Earth Day at Longplay Wine. But we aren't ridiculous,
So as a space, tell me, first of all, the winery side, tell me about, obviously you worked in a lot of places. You worked in a lot of different spaces.
And Todd Hansen influenced my winery design to some degree, and that he said a unified space is the way to go. Barrel room and fermentation all in one room, because then, you can stack the barrels super high when you're fermenting, and you can stack the fermenter super high when you're in barrel, and it gives you so much more space to breathe, and you aren't bumping into posts and things like that as much. And I took that advice. So we have a unified production space. We have a glycol system, and that's more Aaron's influence, because Aaron was really big on temperature control, and it's, I think hopefully it'll work out as to be a good investment. Mm-hmm. And I think when it hits 115 degrees during the heat bomb, it's probably a good idea to have some ability to cool the place. We also have nighttime cooling in that space, where the fans go on at 1:30 in the morning or whatever until 6 in the morning, and change the air in that room during the summer whenever the temperature gets below 58 or whatever. And so that's the production side. We've got big doors, obviously not big enough, but yeah, that's super key too. We did all the processing outdoors. It was an easy vintage for processing outdoors, and I expect we have a big canopy over the crush pad outdoors, so it's nice to be able to process outdoors, which I like to do. The light's good. It's just more room for a forklift to move around. And yeah, as a winemaking space, we've got water and glycol and compressed air all along that wall, which makes it easy to just plug in the diaphragm pump wherever you want, and plug in a tank wherever you want, and things like that. It's kind of, just as a space, I like it. Underneath our feet right here is where we keep the case goods. We've got a basement down there. It's not a lot of fun taking the boxes down or we had designed, in the initial design, there was a dumbwaiter to raise and lower the case goods, but that took up so much room, really, when it comes down to it, and just the expense and structural concerns, we just abandoned that. And I'm glad we did, actually, because it would be slow. I mean, right now it's easy enough, and it's good exercise, isn't it? Yeah, I'm looking at Sam over there. So yeah, that's I don't know what else to say. I mean, you can see the Chehalem Mountains well out the windows when it's not as foggy as it is today, and you can see the vineyard kind of when it snows. The vineyard kind of pops off the mountain, but when there's no snow, it kind of blends into the trees. So that's the trees. A lot of birds. Yeah.
What about this side of it? The public-facing tasting room side of it? What were you looking for in this space?
Well, this room we're in now, I call it the Smithsonian exhibit room, because it's the old tasting room. I just took all the furniture and everything from the old tasting room and plopped it here. So it's not permanently going to be this way, probably, but I kind of like it. But eventually I hope to make it more. The initial plan was to make it a private dining room with one big table or the big groups, or like dinners where you have like that conviviality you get at a long table. Yeah, we gotta sell some wine first. So. And I have some customers who will probably leave me if I get rid of that couch, because it's like so comfortable. So.
You mentioned earlier kind of your introduction to selling wine, and I'm curious about your experience selling wine, learning to sell wine, and what awesome, amazing success you've had in selling wine. So
right.
Tell me about the process of learning and the process of selling your own product, a product that you've created, and you say you're passing it over the counter to someone.
Yeah, I can say it's difficult in some ways, because it is so personal. And like, how do you put a price on it? Mm-hmm. It's insulting. It's like, well, how much is my puppy worth? It's like you don't sell that. It's like I want it to go into the right hands. And I realize we should try to maybe sometime in the not too distant future make this a more sustainable project, because the numbers are bigger now that I've built the building. So I need to get some discipline. Whereas before, give or take, it didn't really matter that much when you're only making a few hundred cases. It's like, if I raise the price $3 a bottle, I'll make $3,000 more. It's like, and it's that much more work. Whereas now, when you're making more wine, you have to cover some bills. It's a little different. So the selling part, I don't really like selling the wine. I like sharing the wine. I don't really call it selling. That's why I love clubs. I love my wine club, because that changes that whole relationship, because they've already bought it. You know, it's like your partners on that journey, and they see my vineyard year after year after year, and so that's the neat part of it.
It's obviously music, big part of you and big part of the place and everything. So tell me about for you kind of the intersection of music and wine and how they feed into each other and how you kind of want to represent music and wine together.
Good question. They're all good. So the wine and music thing, I say wine is kind of like music. They're both sort of an art and science blend, you know? You have to have some structure to the music or it's just noise, and you have to have some structure to the winemaking or it's, you know, vinegar. And there's that delicate dance you do between too much science and too much art. And I think, you know, music, there's something very visceral about music. It's like primal, where my daughter, we were in the car the other day and a Beatles song came on, and you know, she hadn't heard the song in a couple of years, and she's 15 years old, but she knew every word, you know, straight through. And this morning we were listening to Fiona Apple's Fetch the Bolt Cutters, and she does an impersonation of Fiona Apple. It's kind of hilarious, but where she does a little trill. I shouldn't say that. She'll listen to this someday maybe. But there's something about music that just connects so much with a person, and you can remember when you hear a song from your youth, you can remember where you were, or even the smells that day, you know. And it's kind of the same with wine. I think sometimes when you get that amazing bottle of wine, it takes you in that moment where you just kind of lose your sense of the rest of the world, the complexities of it, and it's just there's beauty, and I think there's that similarity there, and I think that's kind of, you know, wine and music, they go together in that regard.
As you've come to as you have this space now and you're sharing both wine and music together, do you look for certain music? Do you look for certain wine to go with certain music? Is it just what you feel like that day? It's
often what I feel like that day. A lot of times I'll ask the first customer through the door, they'll set the tone, so to speak. I'll say, you know, who do you want to listen to? And they'll say somebody. Sometimes I have the artist, sometimes I have the artist and I don't want to listen to the artist that day. And so I'll say, what's a 6 degrees separation from that person, you know? Because it's quite, if they want the Beatles, I might do the George Benson Abbey Road, you know, the Other Side of Abbey Road album or something, even though I love the Beatles, but I don't want to listen to the Beatles every day. And the other thing I consider is whether the music is able to be background music. As much as I don't like the concept of background music, some bands have a lot of horns, or just the vocals are at a pitch that really interferes with conversation. So I try to avoid those. But I like 60s and 70s rock. You know, you can put on Dobie Gray. Some people say he's a one-hit wonder, but it's a great album, you know. And the first cut is his hit, you know. Fade Away, is that what it's called? I don't know the titles of songs. I just, you know the songs. I try not to memorize the titles of the songs. I just listen to whole albums and whatnot. And so, you put that on and people instantly, they connect with it because it's such an iconic song. And there's so many albums like that, you know, and it's fun to see. And it's fun to turn people on to new music too, you know, some obscure, like I love Brian Auger's, I love the Hammond organ. It's I think it goes well with wine, and it's easy to talk over, really. It's at a nice pitch, and you can do a lot with it. And so like Brian Auger's Oblivion Express, when I play that, a lot of people are just like, wow, who is this? This is great. And that's fun, you know? Yeah.
So we kind of talked about how you've gotten here. So I'm kind of curious, looking ahead now. Let's start sort of with the vineyard. Obviously, you've been adding to it piece by piece by piece, kind of honing in your style. What do you see looking ahead for the vineyard in the coming years?
I have a few more acres I can plant. I think some of it is too good for anything but really good Pinot Noir in some ways. There's a corner that I might put to Gruner. And maybe I don't know that I need more Chardonnay, although I love Chardonnay, but just pamper the vineyard, keep it going. We work with Ashley, I forget her last name, it's her first name as well, But we work with this crop consultant from Nutrient called Ashley. She's super to work with. She walks the vineyard with me, and she makes great suggestions. And we're doing some things to really enrich the soil where the vines are. We've always done that, but with her, it's become easier. Let's say to get we've got the daikon radishes growing in the weaker spots, and those will really, I hope, bring a lot of friability to the soil, and also enrich it. And we don't do every other row, cultivation. We've usually been a permanent cover, but where we develop weak spots, we'll cultivate 5 rows in a row for half the block, and then throw compost and heavy cover there. And so that's the main goal right now, is to try to get the whole vineyard more uniform in its vigor and more consistent. Because like I said, you have some swales, and those are a challenge. And, we put in drain field, and it's only good for a handful of years, it seems.
And what about this space and sort of the brand? Obviously, you're making more wine now. So what's next for Longplay?
What's next for Longplay? Well, I'm wrestling with that. I definitely want to do some food with the wine, because I think food and wine. I never drink wine without food really at home, and so I think food shows the wine better, but I definitely want food that shows the wine. So I'm wrestling with that, because that would mean kind of bland food to some degree, and I think that's helpful though for people to experience the wine. So I don't want to become food first. There are some wineries out there that sell food, and if you read their reviews, it's like that's all anybody talks about. Nobody talks about the wine. I dread that, and I try to drive that point home, that we aren't a bar. We're a retail facility where you can sample the merchandise before you take it home and enjoy it. And that's a philosophy I really want to stick with. But when we lived in San Francisco, we went to Jay at the time, and they would do like a little plate of hors d'oeuvres with your tasting, and I think that really added to the experience. It was super memorable for me, and it was delicious. So I don't know if we can approach that level of culinary exquisiteness. Maybe a fancier building we could, but I think it helps to have food with the wine. And I mean the challenge right now is when you only have maybe a couple customers a day, especially during this time of year, keeping food fresh, keeping someone in the kitchen, even if it's me, it's tricky. It's ski season too, so I might take a Saturday off now and then, because my daughter's on the ski team at school, so I like to go watch her race, even though she doesn't like me to watch her race. It makes her nervous. So. But I love to ski, so there's that.
And what about with the growth of the brand? Do you have a goal in mind? Do you have a number of cases or a number of varietals?
I don't. Well, the building is kind of designed to hold the entire vineyard, even if I added a little more. So that would be the ultimate goal, is to be a monopole. And I don't know if we'll get there, if we can push that much through. It's a question of how many club members we can get, maybe. And right now I think we do about 1,200 cases, which is not enough. It's not viable when you pencil it out. It's obviously it doesn't work. So we have to increase production, I think, but you have to sell it. And I think I've already expressed my frustration with distributors. And so I'll stick with Jeff, and hopefully his business will take off and he can move more product down in Los Angeles, where he's located. And but yeah, I think hopefully if we give people a really good experience, we'll start filling up more, and maybe the word will get out. I don't know. I would say marketing is always my weakest point, because I hate being marketed to, and I know I'm marketed to, but I don't know that I'm as susceptible, maybe when it comes to wine, at least, as perhaps other people are. So I like the product to speak for itself. So.
You mentioned earlier your kind of introduction to the industry, and you felt at home right away. Tell me about the industry changes you've seen since then. What has changed, and what does the industry look like today to you now?
a lot more faces I don't know, but I still know. I mean, this is my cohort, it's like Anne Hubach she's been a customer, I forget when she started with me, and off and on she's not with me every year, and that's fine. She's just a fun person to work with. And John Groshaw, last year I had a block of fruit. I needed to sell it, and he stepped up and said, sure, not a problem, I'll take it. It's still the same in that regard. I think there's some that have become maybe a little less approachable in terms of that handshake relationship, but there's still enough of us out there that it's it's like you already know people when you've only tasted their brand, never really interacted with them. And I love when the industry gets together sometimes we'll do retrospective tastings, or we'll go back and do 2013 Pinot Noirs or something like that. It's neat. It's fun.
Have you noticed, you mentioned more faces you don't know, obviously a massive amount of growth even in the time you've been here. Have you noticed anything change from the perspective of more big money in here, more big brands in here? Does it affect you? Does it affect the way you perceive the industry?
It can affect me. Well, and I blame it on distribution to some degree. I think it encourages that, and I think distribution also. It's unfortunate the way the states have sort of corrupted the process, we'll say, of distribution. And it's but it's true of grocery stores. You know what I mean? You've got how many major grocery store chains, then a whole bunch of little ones that struggle, and it's kind of that way with distribution. And I think as we get more big wineries, it becomes harder for the small grocery store. As we get more big grocery stores, it's harder for the small grocery store. And it's the same thing with the winery. It's just harder to break through. And I can totally relate. Even if I'm a small grocery store, I only want to write one check for wine. I don't want to write 10 checks for my wine department. So I might as well work with the one distributor who carries the giant book. And so I appreciate that. And I just wish it were simpler. Because there's so many parts of our economy that are becoming sort of frictionless with technology, and we should be able to get there. Blockchain wine, right?
Soon enough, I'm sure. Well, then tell me about looking ahead for Oregon wine. Obviously, the last couple of years have been tough for everyone. The industry notwithstanding. Coming off a pandemic, coming off the harvest of 2020, that was as bad as it was. What do you see looking ahead? How have you kind of gotten through, and what do you see looking ahead for the industry?
Well, 2020 was a nightmare. I've kind of just erased it somewhat from my memory. We did make a wine. It's a good wine, I think. It scared me, let's say, deep down, in that I worry about the fires, which are completely out of my control. There's nothing I can do, I feel, and so that's unsettling, especially when, for me, it's a big slice of my livelihood, or I don't know if you'd call it a livelihood. My wife has a good job. It's unsettling when you can lose that much money in 1 year and know that it could happen again. I'd always said we always get a crop, and I never bought crop insurance or anything because we always had a crop. And even during 2011, when there was a lot of dark humor, it's going to be all rosé, and then we had that beautiful month of October. That sort of, it's like, the asteroid hits type of thing. It's like, whoa, is there another one? But I think I think things will. There's a lot of things, there's like the tail wagging the dog when it comes to supply, because the crop load can vary so much year to year, and new vineyards get planted whenever we get a good year, quote unquote, and then they come on stream, and it kind of overwhelms the market to some degree because the lags are so long. You're driving on ice, And then the consumer side, I wrestle with my sort of product-oriented focus. I don't want to be an events winery. I think then it's a treadmill where you just have to do more and more events. And I'd rather my product be what people buy. And that's why I'm in this. I'm not in it for the events. That's not my business, right? I want to make wine that makes people, and that's the best part, is when, I have the customer who emails me about how they opened a bottle of my Jory Bench Reserve when they told their parents they were expecting their first child, that type of thing. That's so neat when you get people serve my wines at their weddings, and that's just really cool that they connect with the wine. It's a neat thing. I don't know if people do that over tires, and stuff. So.
So obviously you came into the industry kind of an interesting route into the industry. If someone were to ask you for your advice on joining the Oregon wine industry now, what would you tell them?
It's a great group of people, and it's an exciting career or undertaking, project, diversion, whatever you make it. It's never the same vintage twice, which is just so cool, and there's so many decision points along the way, and you'll never figure it out. I've been doing this since 2005, and I still feel like I know nothing, Whereas my previous job, after 5 years, I was like, I'm the boss, you know what I mean? And it's just really unique in that regard. And maybe I don't work as hard as I should at, learning, let's say, everything. I try to learn experientially to some degree rather than from studying. I think holistic type approach is more natural when it comes to learning languages too. I'd rather learn it more organically than just only books and things like that. So that's been my approach, and maybe it's not the fastest to greatness. I see some people who are so intentional, whereas I'm maybe just a little more let the wine lead me type of person. I think, I my advice also would be, there is sort of, when I started, I had the farm, and I found out, one of the things I found is when you make wine, you get invited to much better parties. It's just so much cooler being, having a wine than it is just having a farm. You're persona non grata to some degree. And having a wine that is your own brand just gets you to good parties and things like that. It's just fun to have that little element there, and it's something you can actually buy, which is neat. The other side I'd say though is, there's an expression: would you rather take a cruise or work on a cruise ship? And working on the cruise ship, not always fun, especially depending on what deck you're stuck with. And so there's that element too. You got to bear that in mind. It's not just writing poetry in the vineyard, as we joke. There's a lot of work and hard decisions. Difficult. Some difficult relations, It can be challenging. 2020, with customers, some canceled at the last minute, some still took the fruit, some paid me partially even though they didn't take their fruit. It was, and I know a lot of them wrestled with that, and I hope I wrestle with, I'm trying to reconcile that with myself, how I was treated differently by different people, and I'm trying to just ignore it, and I hope they don't wrestle with it too much either. It was a one-off thing, and you're going to react in the moment, and I don't hold grudges.
2020 definitely, as you mentioned, with that harvest, it forced a lot of things on people very quickly. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and I don't know that everybody was at their best, and so I'm not going to hold them to everything. So.
Appreciate that. That's all the questions that I have for you. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover here today that we should have covered?
No, I just wanted to make sure I mentioned Javier, who's like my hero. I wanted to mention Aaron Hess, who's just I don't want him to be forgotten. And that's pretty. Those were the two main things, and just the magic of a vineyard. I think I hope that was communicated, especially older vines. They just have so much personality. They're unique. They're like little kids in some ways.
Well, perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time today, for your stories, for your candor, and we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Thanks.